microphones that I don't have. Things ain't like they used to be. We do not own the copyrights to this music, but we're going to let it play out.
We must. Thank you for that, Paul. We appreciate that. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, welcome, welcome to Vulnerable Voices. This is season 2, Stay Woke Wednesdays. And today is our final episode of the season. We are so excited. We have some great guests this evening, and we're going to talk about Reach One, Teach One. And I'm going to start out with my intro this evening. And I just want to talk about the goodness of God. I need everybody to understand how good God is.
Goodness.
I've been thinking about my day, my life, my journey.
Preaching.
And I've just been so blessed. And his amazing grace has just carried me. And I'm just thankful. And I've learned that truly, you already have everything you need. So when you get to that point and you're wondering and you know, how am I going to make it through? God has already given you what you need. The best thing you can do and the easiest thing you can do is pray.
Hey!
Okay.
So today I just want to just give some glory and some praise to the God I serve. I want him to know that I am so thankful for all that he has done, all that he will continue to do, because he has brought me through some tough times, some dark moments, through the valley, around the corner, under the curb, it feels like sometimes. But my God is good and he hasn't failed me yet. And I know he won't, because I believe in his word. I believe what he says to be true. And so from that, I know that I am great, because the God I serve is great as well. So that's my intro. God is good. Let's continue to honor him as we do this great work that we do. 2 super guests today. We have we're calling her the super guest, right? She has viewed every episode.
Thank you.
Yes. She frequently tunes in. She has not missed one. And so we just asked Miss Yvette East to be with us today and be a part of this conversation. And we also have the one and only Reverend Daryl Gray. He's going to bring us some insightful information today, some news that you can use. So sit back, get ready, and let's take this journey with Reverend Gray and Yvette East.
So I want to thank both of y'all for being here with us tonight. And, you know, and Yvette, off air, you're telling us that you are a longtime educator. So I'm sure you got some teaching to do too tonight. So we're going to Don't think we're going to shy away from asking you questions tonight. We're going to get on you and want you to be a part of this dialogue. You know, and Reverend Gray, also one of my fraternity brothers in the illustrious organization.
So that's what it is.
Okay. Right? So good brother. So we have you here tonight. But, you know, I've kind of expressed that you're a legend in the civil rights game, and you have a pretty long resume. So I would love for you to kind of tell people who you are, some of what you've done, and also maybe even, you know, name drop of some of the people that you've worked with over these years throughout your career. You know, people need to know. They need to know, man. Tell them who you are, brother. Tell them.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Dr. Miller.
I know that I can call you Paul, but we have a lot of people out there that claim to be doctors with honorary stuff. And don't get me wrong, honorary is all right. But when you have your earned doctorate, the Bible said, give honor where honor is due. And so, Dr. Miller, we are proud of what you've done and what you've accomplished in your work. And so to you and to Miss Erica and to Miss
Doctor
Erica, I didn't know.
That's all right.
Giving honor. Honor.
Thank you.
Do you have any doctors that we need to know about before we start?
No.
Okay, so we have two doctors. We have two doctors, and then the rest of us patients. So we'll do that. My civil rights journey, and I want to be real brief because I do want to talk about a couple of issues that I think that we ought to talk about, and your listeners are may be interested in. My civil rights journey started really at the age of 14 in Spartanburg, South Carolina. I led my first protest in 1969. None of you were born at that time, but I led my first protest as a 10th grader at Dorman High School. We had just integrated the schools there. Obviously, Brown versus the Board of Education, 1954, but it didn't get to a lot of the states. It was like the Emancipation Proclamation. It took the horses a while to bring the message. And we didn't integrate in South Carolina, at least in my school, till 69. And we were at a basketball game, Dr. Miller, and basketball pep rally. The doors flung open. White student rode in on a white horse and a big Confederate flag. I got up and I walked out, thinking I was walking out by myself until I turned around and 400 students had followed me out. That was my first exposure. It wasn't my first exposure to racism. I grew up in South Carolina in the 50s and the 60s. I think that being around NAACP, being around SCLC, being around segregation, being around racism all my life, and having a strong mother who's an educator, former educator, Navy veteran father, there were certain things that were instilled in me. Self-respect, self-worth, self-determination were part of that. And so after I got out of the Army, after serving for 5 years, I attended Benedict College in Columbia, South Carolina. And my roommate was Ralph Abernathy III, Ralph David Abernathy III, the son of Ralph Abernathy, the close personal friend and confidant of Dr. King. Ralph and I were involved in another march in South Carolina. And as a result of that march, Dr. Abernathy came to South Carolina, met with me, and offered me a position with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And so it was Dr. Abernathy, good Kappa, who brought me into the civil rights movement, brought me proper into the civil rights movement with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And that was because of my friendship with young Ralph, who has since passed on. From there, I went to work with Reverend Jackson, Jesse Jackson, with Rainbow Coalition. Reverend Jackson sent me out to Kansas, from Miami to Kansas. So I left Columbia, South Carolina to Miami with Reverend Jackson, from Miami to Kansas to find delegates for Reverend Jackson when he ran for president the first time. And I said, Reverend Jackson, I don't know what kind of delegates you want me to find in Kansas. There's nothing I did but lions and tigers and bears. But we were able to get 4 delegates out of Kansas. And so because of my work, I was asked by Senator Billy McCray, who has since retired, to run for state senate. Now, I had only been in Kansas for 18 months. But he said, you don't owe anybody anything. You haven't been bought off yet. He said, people have seen your work. They've seen your commitment. He said, run. And I did. He retired. I ran for his seat. Special election. I was blessed to become the only Black state senator in Kansas and the youngest one in the country. While I was in the Senate, I got called to the ministry. I know. My and so I left Kansas after serving about 18 months, almost 2 years in the Senate, to accept the call to preach. Went back to Atlanta, ITC, Morehouse School of Religion, and I was writing for a newspaper. And this is I'm almost here. I was writing for a newspaper, and the Atlanta Tribune, and I was interviewing Dr. Joseph Eccles Lowry, the late Dr. Joseph Eccles Lowry, former president of SCLC. And I was interviewing him for a cover story. So I was writing for the paper, going to school. Here I am in the office of Dr. Lowry. And at the end of the interview, he said, I want to offer you a job. I said, well, I'm in school and I have a part-time job. He said, no, I want to offer you a real job. And he asked me if I'd be willing to serve as the National Communications Director for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. I'm sitting with an icon, and he's asking me if I want to be the communications director for what I've always considered the premier civil rights organization of all time, Dr. King's organization. And so obviously I said yes. Sorry, Dr. Erica, I didn't need to pray about that one. I was all in.
Yeah.
I was all in. And
Yeah.
I worked for Dr. Lowry for 5 years as the communications director for SCLC. After 5 years, I was hired to be the executive director of the NAACP in Atlanta. And during that time, my grandfather died in Canada, and I moved to Canada. I spent 20 years in Canada. I started a newspaper, pastored a church, did all kinds of things in Canada, from Nova Scotia to Montreal. And then after 20 years in Canada, I decided I wanted to come home. And so I met with Dr. Charles Steele, who was visiting in Montreal, and he offered me a job at SCLC. Seems like I couldn't get away from SCLC no matter where I went. Mm-hmm. And so he offered me a job as the executive special assistant to the national president of SCLC. That's how I met Dr. Miller, because one of my tasks under Dr. Steele was to help to create the National Youth Leadership Council for SCLC, Next Generation Leadership Council. And my job was to identify 40 young Black people from across the country to be that next wave of civil rights leaders, to follow in the footsteps of Rosa Parks and Dr. King and Mrs. King and just so many, Daisy Bates and so many others. And Dr. Miller was one of them. He wasn't Dr. Miller then, he was just Paul. But he was doing some amazing things in New York. And so we identified him as one of those 40. If Du Bois talks about the talented 10th, that 40 had to be that 0.1%, that amazing young people. We met. It was a connection, immediate connection. Went down to Baton Rouge, Louisiana at the National SCLC Convention, inaugurated the group, and all of them went on to do some amazing things, continue to do some amazing things. I was with SCLC, I guess, for a couple of years with Dr. Steele, and then one of the 40 from the group, Cori Bush, decided that she wanted to start an SCLC chapter in St. Louis. And so Dr. Steele allowed me to come out to St. Louis to start the chapter. We met with Ferguson frontline protesters, met with clergy. We were on a pathway to start a chapter. And then 2 months into that, Cori called me and said, we've got to put it on hold. And I said, okay, maybe I messed up. What did I do wrong? She said, no, Reverend Gray, I'm going to run for the Senate. She was one of our 40. She said, I want to run for the Senate. Cori was one of the Ferguson frontliners. She came out as a
crazy story
during Mike
I'm
Brown.
telling you, right?
Yeah, when Mike Brown died, when Mike Brown was murdered, Cori was one of those frontliners who came out and spent 300 and some days in Ferguson on the street, in the midst of the tanks and the police violence and everything else. So she was the real deal. And so she said, I want to run for Senate. So being a former senator, I said, okay, cool. State Senate would be good because we want to move from protest to politics. She said, no, Reverend Gray, not State Senate, U.S. Senate. So my mouth dropped. I said, U.S. Senate, Missouri. I said, I don't do symbolism. I said, I'm too old for symbolism. I said, why do you want to do this? And she said, Reverend Gray, no, it's about substance, because I don't think I can win. But the person that will eventually get the Democratic nomination, we don't want him to move too far right. He's going to get the nomination. He could possibly win. But everything that we've done, everything that we've been through in Missouri, through Ferguson, Mike Brown's death and everything, we don't want people to lose sight of the narrative. We want to make sure that we talk about criminal justice reform. We want to make sure we talk about police accountability, police transparency, and police violence. She said, I want to run. And so Corey ran. And she went to every county in the state. She told her story. Single mom, raising 2 children, nurse, protester, the whole works. And when we got into situations, Dr. Miller, where we knew we were in a hostile crowd, like 300 people, and only 4 of us are Black in Miller County, Missouri. Mm-hmm. Then I said, Corey, don't talk policy. Just tell your story. Talk about being a single mom raising your children. Talk about the hardships that you had to endure growing up as a Black woman, as a Black person. Just tell your story. And she did extremely well in that race. The other person got the nomination, but she did well. Based upon that, I had to come out. So I had to pastor a church in Montreal, be in Atlanta for Dr. Steele and work as his assistant, and come out to Missouri to be a campaign manager. So it was the Trinity. It was that triangle. And then it got to the point where I realized I had to give up one of them. And so I had to give up SCLC because my church was paying my salary. While I was working for Corey, there was no salary. So the church was actually paying me to do this work. And so I gave up SCLC, but then after 3 years, really 2 years, I said, I can't take a full-time salary from a church and only be there 2 weekends a month. It wasn't fair. And so I gave my resignation to the Imani Family and Full Gospel Church in Montreal and relocated permanently to St. Louis. Since I've been here, I am have been blessed that I am the secretary of the Missouri Democratic Party. I am the Midwest Regional Coordinator for Social Justice for the Progressive National Baptist Convention. I am the political advisor for the St. Louis Metropolitan Clergy Coalition and the social justice chairperson for the Missionary Baptist State Convention. We started a business, Gray & Gray Associates, which is political and media consulting, and I've relocated to St. Louis. And so here I am.
Rev, you forgot to mention that didn't Corey just win the election too?
I was going to mention that lastly.
Oh, did I gave it away? I was excited to drop it. Now I tried to get her on here tonight too.
Planting the seeds and working with people like Dr. Paul Miller and Corey Bush and Dominique Alexander and Marcus Hughes and so many others. Corey, after her 3rd try, she ran for U.S. Senate the first time, came in 2nd in the primary, ran for U.S. Congress against veteran Senator Lacey Clay and came in 2nd. And this time around, she ran against Lacey Clay again. And Corey became the first Black female congressperson elect for the state of Missouri. And we're very proud. And so in January 1st or the 20th or whenever she gets inaugurated, she'll become Congresswoman Corey Bush, making history in Missouri. And I want to say I'm proud of all of them. I'm extremely proud of Corey, but I'm proud of Paul and Dominique and Marcus and all the rest of them because they're still getting into good trouble. And I thank God that he put me in the path of these young people, because this is a marathon. And for people like myself, who has been blessed to be in the company of so many people, Mother Rosa, I mean, being in Mother Rosa's company, Jesse and Coretta and Dr. Abernathy and Dr. Lowry and just Andy Young and just, the late Congressman John Lewis and so many others, where they passed the torch to me, that it is a blessing to know that there are those like Paul and Corey and so many here, Dr. Erica, and so many here who we can feel comfortable enough in passing that torch. It is important. Now, there are a whole lot of folk that are trying to hold on to that torch as long as they can. Mm-hmm. And it has nothing to do with those who are running that next leg. It really has nothing to do with that. They've just gotten used to the titles and the accolades and whatever else comes with it. But I'm a witness. I'm a witness that the light is shining right behind us. There's a bright light to our future. And so I don't have any problem in saying that and passing that. And so, like I said, with Corey, I could talk about Cori Bush all night, because Corey's the real deal. She was on CNN today. She was on CNN today because the former President Obama made the comment about defund the police. And his comment was he felt that it shouldn't be our rallying cry. But we've had a lot of rallying cries, and defund the police is a slogan. It's symbolic. It means a whole lot of things, but at least it gets a conversation. And Corey went on CNN and, with respect, and said, he can think what he wants to think. But until police stop killing Black folk in the street, unarmed, male and female, young and old, the George Floyds, the Breonna Taylors, and so many others, Tamara Rice, we can go down the list. Eric Gardner, Sandra Bland, there's a list. Absolutely. And the list continues to grow. And so what Congresswoman-elect Bush was saying, that if defund the police gets your attention, then we'll say defund the police. If it's going to get your attention. But we understand that it means divest. It means stop spending 50+% of a city budget on a police force that's not solving any crimes. It's not decreasing crime. Right. In St. Louis, we've got almost 300 murders already this year. We're number one in the nation. But we have more police per capita than any other city our size in the country. But you want to give police more money. To do what? You want to spend money on the enforcement side. You're beginning to spend money on the intervention side, but you don't want to spend any money on the prevention side. Mm-hmm. And so that's the conversation. When we talk about defund the police, don't get caught up. President Obama, and I love him dearly, and he made the comment today, so it gets us into the issues now. That he made the comment today that we lose people, we lose a part of our audience when we say defund the police. And I say, well, then those are people who really weren't part of our audience in the first place. Because if they have been part of our audience for any length of time, then they would understand why defund the police and the language is important. So I understand.
Let me ask you a question, Rev, with that.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question. So then how do you pull new people into the audience? So, because I'm with you. I definitely agree with everything that you said thus far. But so if President Obama has any validity or any point to it, then what do you do to pull the new people into the audience, or how do you transform somebody from where they're at to where you need them to be?
I think repetition is important, Dr. Miller. I think we have to, the reality is, and somebody texted me today and said, people who voted for Cori Bush and people who voted for Barack Obama aren't really going to go away just because of the language that we use. And so we just need to continue to stand fast, The Bible says, be steadfast and unmovable. And so that's what we have to continue to do, even in the language that we're using, because the language is at least getting someone's attention. But then, Dr. Miller, then after we get your attention, Vic, we have to educate as quickly as we can. And so the process has always been about education. Dr. King, and you follow the principles of nonviolence. When we talk about, first of all, getting information and then providing education. Even before we do any civil disobedience, you've got to do those two things first. And so I think that it's the Barack Obamas that's going to have to educate that audience that leaves about what we mean when we say defund the police. So Barack is going to have to do that. Biden's going to have to do that. Or President-elect Biden's going to have to do that. Vice President-elect Harris is going to have to do that. Because if that particular audience is going to stand still long enough for them to teach one, then they're going to have to do that. It's not my job to teach that audience. It's somebody else's job to do that. Maybe that's Sister Yvette's job. Maybe that's Dr. Erica's job. Maybe my job is just to shake the tree and say, defund the damn police. Right. And whatever falls off. Excuse me for I didn't mean.
No, you're okay.
No, you're good.
You can say what you want.
If that's my job, if Corey's job is to shake the tree, and then something falls off, then Dr. Miller, Dr. Erica, Miss Yvette has got to pick that up and then begin to feed people.
Right.
So I think that's the only way that's going to happen, Dr. Miller, because I don't have time, because I'm still out here in the street. So I don't have time to deal with your sensibilities. Mm-hmm. I don't have time to deal with your narrow-mindedness. I don't have time to deal with your excuses, because oftentimes that's what it is, because you know that we're not really talking about abolishing police. Now, some folk are, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about reinvesting money into prevention versus enforcement.
So, and then I'm going to turn it over to Erica, but I'm going to ask you this, Yvette. I brought you into it, right? So you hear defund the police, and you're an educator, and so you got to explain this to your white teachers, or you got to explain this to some of your kids, and they ask you how you feel about it. They ask you, what does it mean? How do you get this across to your educators and to your kids? What's your message, Yvette? How do you work this?
Well, it's all about being proactive instead of reactive. We're not saying, okay, we're gonna get rid of the police. Who are you gonna call when you get in trouble? Come on, then let's be real about it.
Right.
Okay. Mm-hmm. What we're saying is, let's put the funding in a different way, where we can find a measure of bringing in support systems to prevent these things from happening, so that they don't have to be so aggressive in what has turned out to be, oh, we feel endangered, so we're going to go kill these folks. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's the bottom line. Gotcha. And so that you have to educate people about that, because in their minds they say, oh, they're anti-police. And no, we're not anti-police. Mm-hmm. Not at all. And so you gotta really take them to where they are. Let them know that no, we police is part of the community, but we are in favor of strategies to be proactive, to be preventive instead of reactive, mm-hmm. to have a better outcome.
And
I couldn't say it better.
Yeah, Yvette, that's and her presentation, right?
Right.
Completely different from Reverend Gray, right? Which goes to his point, my job is to shake the tree. Mm-hmm. And it's someone else's job to find their spot and communicate in a different way, but still be active in this work. Don't stop, keep pushing. So to that point, Reverend Gray, I'm curious to know, how do we teach this younger generation how to find their place, how to understand what their role is? Your job is to shake the trees.
Right.
My job is stand on the mountaintop and communicate it to everybody and give them a hug at the end, right? Mm-hmm. Yvette clearly has a way of speaking to a different set of people and them being able to acknowledge what she's trying to convey. So how do you get people, especially young people, who are going to carry the torch, to figure out what their job, their role, responsibility is?
Well, you know what? I've been blessed because my love of history, and I think that if we look from the civil rights movement to now, which is the new civil rights movement, you'll find that young people have always been involved. The under 30 really has made the difference in social justice and social change ever since we defined or came up with a definition of what that is. It's been the under 30s. And so there is no hesitancy on the part of the under 30 or even the under 35 crowd. I don't know what that millennial number is these days, but with the millennials, there is a thirst, I think, to engage, that there's a thirst to be active and a thirst to be involved. And I think that when you say, how do we do it? I mean, we do it with a lot of patience, but we recognize we have to accept, and I say this as an elder, we have to accept millennial warriors, social justice warriors as our partners and not necessarily our proteges. Because a lot of them have an expertise that we don't have, that we didn't have. True. A lot of them have capabilities and abilities that we never had. I laugh because as we were talking, my daughter and her partner walked by, and the young lady's name is Ohan Ash. If you go online and look her up, when you talk about Cori Bush, Ohan, Ohan, Ash, Ashe, one of the most fierce warriors, and I'll use that interchangeable that I've ever met. And the willingness is there. The wanting to be involved is there. We've got to be patient. We've got to understand, and I'm not saying gradual. I'm saying patient. We've got to allow. No, not allow. Wrong choice of words. We've got to accept the methods that they choose to use in this time. We have to accept the language that they choose to use in this time. And when we talk about back in the day, we used to say to our elders, either lead, follow, or get out of the way. One young lady, Black Lives Matters activist, got up one day and said in something, this ain't my grandmama's movement. And folk politely said, yes, it is. Because there's nothing that you're thinking about doing that we haven't done. You just have a greater capacity to do it. You've got the internet, you've got social media, you've got all of that. We didn't have it. And so I give long answers to short questions because I'm Baptist.
But they're good. They're good.
Yeah. But I think that once again, we have to see young activists, the elders and the young activists as partners.
So, but you think about that. And so one thing that you said, and so I think there's a subgroup of young people who are so passionate. And so what I hear you saying is that we got to give way to them and just accept what they're bringing to the table. But then on the other side of the coin is we have so many young people who are disengaged and who have a mindset that is so self-centered to where if it's not about me, it doesn't matter. And so those are the group of young people that I am worried about, because a lot of the young people that I come encounter with lean more towards that side than lean towards the ones who are out there at the front line fighting. And so how do we get them interested? How do we get them?
It's engaged? Not the message, Dr. Miller. It's the messenger. I think that we've got to make sure that we send the right messenger. It goes back to what we just said when we talk about defund the police. Miss Yvette she's going to walk into a room and people will be a lot more comfortable than me walking into the room, because when they see me coming, they go, oh shoot, here he comes again. But I think that I think each generation has got to speak to its own. I think that this generation, because they know the language, they know all the buzzwords. I don't know them. I mean, like I said, even in this environment, I mean, I'm Reverend Gray. I've got a history. I'm out there, so I'm going to be respected. But there are certain environments, certain rooms that my voice is going to be the least that will be heard. Corey Bush's voice will be heard before mine will. Orhan's voice will be heard before mine will. Bruce Franks, Dr. Miller, your voice will be heard. Erica, your voice, because you're at that age, and it doesn't matter if you got Dr. Miller in front of your name. You're still at that age where you're still going to use language that the folk are going to be comfortable with. And so you're going to get a lot further in a conversation that I'm going to get. I may get respected, but I may not get heard. and there's a difference. So I think, Dr. Miller, it's the messenger. But it does go back to what Yvette and Erica said. And you also, is that it's always been a team approach. Everybody's got to figure out, what my role is. Who do I send? I mean, we can all say, here I am, send me. But if I'm not the right one for you to send, then you're causing more problems than you are finding solutions. And so I think that Dr. Miller, Paul, you're gonna have to identify. You're gonna have to cultivate, mentor, teach, however, mold, shape someone that's going to be able to take Dr. Miller's message into that village, because Dr. Miller's not going to be able to take it. But it's up to you and Yvette and Erica and myself to make sure that whatever experience, whatever insight, whatever wisdom, whatever we have to give to this next group, that we give them that so that they can use that in addition to whatever tool they're going to use. We're just giving them something to add to their toolbox. That's all we're doing. And so, like I said, and I've seen it. One last example. I was running for political office here, and I mean, like I said, we're up to 300 murders or whatever it is now. And so I went down this one street, and I already knew where I was going. I already knew that this was the street where some of the young gang members were hanging out. And I'm walking by myself. And so I walked down, and now before I got there, I made sure that I pulled up my literature and said, hey, I'm Reverend Gray. I'm a candidate. I don't want them to think I'm the police or a snitch or anything like that. So I identified myself, and I sat there and I talked to these young brothers. And it was about 15 of them. And yes, they're selling drugs and they're doing all kinds of stuff, man. Only God knows what they're doing. I mean, they're doing all kinds of stuff. But I spend a good 30, 45 minutes out of a canvassing time. When you're canvassing, you don't spend that much time with anybody. And when I left, one of the young brothers looked at me and said, thank you. And I said, for what? He said, for stopping and for talking to us. And I can go down that street now at any time, day or night. But the key was not what I said. They may never remember anything that I said, but they'll remember that I showed up. Mm-hmm. They'll remember that I stopped to give them that time, not just to talk, but to listen, because they had some good ideas. They may have chosen a different lifestyle than I would have chosen. They chose a life of crime based upon whatever factors, poverty, poor education, poor housing, you know all the things. And then when I walked away, an older lady said, you're pretty brave. I said, it had nothing to do with being brave. I said, how am I going to represent a street that I'm afraid to walk down? How am I going to represent people that I'm afraid to have a conversation with? And so, Paul, that makes the difference. I think, and listen, particularly with these young folk, because these young folk, they know when you're scared, and they also know when you're fake.
Mm-hmm. They can smell it. Now,
and they'll call you on it.
as we're getting closer to time here, but I think, since that's our final episode, we can go a few minutes over. And I want to ask another question that I would like to throw out there. And so, what is the biggest issue today that if you had your druthers to be able to influence change or talk about, what is it right now? What do you need people to know? Like
wealth equity.
You've been dealing with issues for civil rights for so many years. What's the big issue today?
Wealth. I think it's wealth equity. That's what got Dr. King killed. Some of Dr. King's last speeches, if you go back and listen to them, he was talking about economic injustice. That's what got him killed. When Dr. King said that we're going to bring poor people to Washington, D.C., he wasn't just talking about black folk. He wasn't talking about 250,000 black folk to talk about sitting on the customer side of the counter. He was talking about owning the restaurant. And so when Dr. King started talking about wealth equity, and with the influence that he had, the powers that be killed him. We need to begin to talk about wealth equity in our communities, to be able to build our own, to be able to buy from our own. That's what we need to begin to do. We need to begin to build an economic infrastructure within our own community. And I'm not talking about just small business. I'm talking about small business, medium-sized manufacturing, producing. I would venture to say that Malcolm's death came because he wanted to connect the diaspora. He wanted to connect Africa, the Caribbean, and the U.S. He wanted to connect it economically. He said, why do we have to keep going through white people to get to black folk material? It makes no sense. And so you had two of the most prolific leaders in our time killed because they began to talk about wealth equity. And until we do that, Dr. Miller, until we find a solution to that, remember, if we pool our resources, we're the 9th richest nation in the world economically, but our money doesn't stay in our community.
No.
It might hit our community twice, and that's only if you go to the beauty shop and the barber shop, or Uncle Joe down there who's fixing somebody's car. Those become the reality in our communities. And so, I mean, all of these other things, when we talk about police reform or criminal justice reform, when we talk about all those other things, that's fine. But you asked me number one. Unless we're able to provide for ourselves, then we'll never be able to control anything. And white folk don't, listen, money controls politics. Politics doesn't control money.
Absolutely.
So where do we start? So how do we start? So give us
goes back to education, what you're doing and what Miss Yvette and what Miss Erica are doing. It goes back to education and teaching the value of keeping the dollar in the community. And it starts in the elementary school. Back then when I was growing up, I had a savings account. My mother made sure that all of us had a savings account. And we weren't able to touch it. Yep. Until we were 18. Now we didn't put a lot of money in it, but what that $500-600 we had, man, we understood the value of saving. We saved in a black credit union, and we spent money within the community. My father was a business person, but it was taught to us while we were young. And I'm not trying to write off a generation, but hey Paul, when the children of Israel, when they were walking around in the wilderness, looking at the same rocks and looking at the same trees, somebody decided that in order for Israel to survive, a whole generation had to be killed off in the wilderness. And so we've got to say, all right, let's move past this generation who is already set in their ways. We've already been indoctrinated on what we're going to do. White people's ice is always going to be colder than black people's ice, and white people's sugar is always going to be sweeter than black people's sugar. We've already bought into that foolishness. And so now we've got to deal with a group who has not drunk the Kool-Aid yet. And that's young people. That's that group that you're dealing with. That's got to be our focus, Dr. Miller. If I only had 10 hours left, I probably should give 8 of those hours to the babies.
Amen.
Because the other group, all I'm doing is saying goodbye to them. I'm going to take 2 hours and say goodbye to them. But that 8 hours, I need to give to these babies who has much more ahead of them than those folk I'm saying goodbye to. That's the reality. And if we're not dealing with that, if we're not dealing with that, if we're not focusing on our children, that's why when I went to and visited you at your school to see what you were doing, come on, man, you had me in tears. Because that's got to be our focal point. You know, here they're closing down 10 black schools, 10 predominantly black schools in St. Louis. What are we going to do? Who's going to educate our babies? And so the attack in the black, if you want to destroy the black community, black family, black church, black school. If you want to destroy the future of the black community, destroy the black family, destroy the black church, and destroy the black school. That's our community. That's been our saving grace. And that's where the attack is. It's real, Dr. Miller. And until we acknowledge it as being real and go back to basics, then as Dr. Joseph Lowry would say, everything has changed, but nothing has changed.
You know that?
And Ohan, come here, Ohan. Ohan's gonna. I want you to see her.
Let's see. Put her in camera. Let's see.
Ohan.
Hurry up, because they're ready to close out.
We want to see Ohan.
Let's see. Where's she at?
Hello, Ohan.
Hello.
We hear you over there doing good work.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
This generation. This is the leadership. This is who we need to be listening to and looking out for. This generation.
We're gonna get her on next season.
Well, listen,
Ohan, you're gonna join us next season?
Oh, hey, Dr. Miller, and she got something for you now. She
gonna bring it.
You're gonna join us next season?
Love it.
You gotta answer me. Is she gonna answer? She gonna join? Okay. So we'll be honored to have you as a guest. You know, as we wrap up our season 2, we hope that people have enjoyed. You know, and as you've noticed, we didn't do a lot of talking this episode. We did a lot of listening. And so when I say we listen, that's part of Reach One, Teach One, with being able to listen and learn for people who have came before you and who have done it. I've always heard a hard head make a soft behind. So that means that you need to listen. So being able to listen to a brother who has such substance and who's been around and who's seen it and has done it, he's given us some jewels and some words of wisdom tonight. And if anything, just coming out of this, on top of what Erica and Yvette have said as well, is that we need to really invest time into our youth, and so we need to continue to invest in our young people because they have so much more time than we have to help get things together and help change. We just need them to listen. And so as we continue to say it, let's say it in ways that they can understand it. Let's give them a message. Let's give them a message of hope, and let's bring them into our solution. Let our young people be the change that we want to see. So we thank everybody who's watched for the last 2 seasons. We will be back with a season 3, and that will be to be determined as soon coming. And we'll make sure that we continue to hopefully entertain, enlighten, and bring you quality, wonderful guests such as we've had today. We want to thank you guys for being here. Thank you for the wisdom that you've dropped. And please continue to do what you do and be the lights that you are. Thank you for signing on with us, and we will see everybody soon.
Peace.
All right. Peace. God bless. Be safe.